We're combining all the best old school wisdom with all the top new school methods to bring you the optimal way to coach and play the great game of baseball. This is the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass with Coach Bo.
Welcome, coaches. This is the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Coach Bo with you. Episode 82. I hope everything is going well for all of you. Hope your week is going well. I hope this episode finds you in a good place. Speaking of episodes, last week in episode 81, I talked about an end of the year survey. If you haven't listened to it, go back. I highly recommend listening to episode 81. In fact, I recommend listening to every episode. If you have not gone back and looking at the statistics, it looks like most of you are going back. If you joined us late, if you joined us in the last 6 months or in the last 3 months or in the last month, you've gone back and listened. It looks like the number of listens is fairly equal across the board, although episodes 1 through 25 have less listens. And again, there's no commercials on there. I don't get paid because you go back and listen to those, but I highly recommend going back and listening to those first 25 episodes because we covered so much good stuff in those first episodes as well as these subsequent episodes. So I highly recommend going back at a minimum and listening to them at least one time because there's a bunch of stuff that we have not covered again since then. And if you've started listening just in the last 6 months, you missed a lot of stuff. Very rarely do we go back and repeat the same thing. We do cover it from different angles. We do dive deeper into some of those topics, yes, but very rarely do I go back and cover the same thing over and over and over again. So I highly recommend going back and listening to those early episodes if you have not already. On top of that, it doesn't hurt to listen to the episodes or the topic or the subject or the information, even though it may be very similar. It doesn't hurt to listen to it a couple times. If you've read a book or listened to some, or even audiobook, something a second time, or listened to a coaching conference, maybe a seminar, maybe a coach speak. If you've listened to them a second time, you're almost always going to hear something new, get something new out of it. You're going to hear something that you don't remember from the first time. So it doesn't hurt to listen to something a second time. In fact, listening to something a second time or a third time really can solidify that paradigm that you're trying to get from it. And also it'll help you pick up some of those tips that you didn't hear the first time around. With that said, go back and listen to episode 81 where we talk about an end of the year, end of the season survey, a feedback generating survey to be a better coach, to serve your players better. I highly recommend going back, listening to that if you didn't already, and doing that survey, completing that survey, having your players and the parents from your team complete that survey. And in fact, I'd like to add another part to that. I highly recommend, if you're the head coach or you were the manager, I highly recommend you give a survey, a different survey to your assistant coaches. And that's what we're going to get into part 1. We are going to talk about how to write a survey for your assistant coaches. Also, I had a listener question that I wanted to answer on here. It was a fantastic question about motivation, and I wanted to answer that here in this episode. And also, I wanted to share with you something that is very important to understand when it comes to keeping the ego in check for coaches. The ego is the enemy is a well-known phrase going around these days, but the ego as a coach can definitely undermine. It can just bring down the house. It can bring down the team when the coach lets the ego run the team, when the coach lets their ego get the better of them. And I'm going to share with you a mindset that'll help you from avoiding the highs, the super highs, and those low lows. So avoiding the high highs and the low lows. And I'm going to share with you a little slice of humble pie, also with a slice of you're not that bad pie. So we'll talk about that in this episode in just a little bit. First off, last week, the survey that we discussed, the end of the season survey that we discussed was for your players, for the parents of your team. Now, a piece, a component, another part of that survey, almost a separate survey for your assistant coaches if you were the head coach or the manager. Getting feedback from your assistant coaches, I truly believe is valuable. Now, it's going to be hard to do this anonymously because you may only have a couple assistant coaches, or you may only had one assistant coach, or you might have only had 3 assistant coaches. So it's a little harder to keep that anonymous, but I highly recommend that you do this nonetheless. And maybe you have them add their, maybe you meet together, and maybe instead of doing it over, say, a Google form, maybe you meet together. This is what I would recommend: meeting together with your coaching staff, getting some dinner, maybe making it a dinner. Have a few drinks. If you don't drink, even better. Just have some iced tea, generate some ideas, but get that face-to-face contact where you can compliment them, you can thank them in person as a staff. I highly recommend you host or go out to a dinner, have a lunch, have a breakfast, even better. Just get up in the morning, have it before the kids are out of the house. Say, hey, we're going to meet over here at the local breakfast shop. We're going to have some coffee, maybe pick up the bill, pick up the tab, and meet together as a staff. Say, let's get together from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, or even earlier if you can, or do a dinner. And you get together with your staff and you discuss the pros, the cons, the pluses, the minuses, the good, the bad, the ugly from the year, things moving forward. Set together a plan for everybody. Even if you're not going to be together in the following season, the upcoming season, next season, you can still put together a plan to get better as a crew, as a group, or individually as you move forward with your coaching. One thing I highly recommend when you do this is to set the tone, the vibe early. Set it as a no holds barred, let it go, get it off your chest. If you have something, no feelings are involved here. This is simply about getting better. I do think it's important that you set the tempo, you set the tone as a coach in this meeting, as the manager, as the head coach, with some positivity. I highly recommend you go first and you give positive feedback to all of the coaches, praise something specific or multiple things, specific things that they did to help the team, to help the club, to help the program this past season. And along with that, provide some constructive feedback, things that they can use moving forward if they so choose to be a coach in the future or next season or down the road. So definitely want to start with positivity, definitely want to highlight some positive things. You want to thank them for their time, their help, their assistance, and then also share with them if there's a big needle mover that they could maybe improve on, share with them that, and keep it as objective as possible, keep it positive. But at the end of the day, we need to all get better. And if that's something we don't want to hear, or that's something that they don't want to hear, we can't just kowtow or cater to that softness, emotional softness all the time, because then nobody will ever get better. Nobody will ever hear the truth. So positivity, start it off, give them good feedback, give them thanks. If there's one big needle mover or two big needle movers that they could work on, share that with them, and then let them go and go around. Maybe you break it up into parts. This is what I would recommend, is break it up and go around. All right, everybody's going to go around and share something positive that they saw each and every other coach do this last season. Something that really stood out as a positive influence, or multiple things. And maybe you don't put a cap on it. Maybe you say, hey, you can share 1, 2, 3 things that you saw each of us all do, and then go around like a little round table. An example of that, you could say to your assistant, let's say his name is Chuck. I love that name, hypothetical name, Chuck. Hey, Chuck, we're going to start with you. My thoughts on you this year as an assistant, my thoughts on and feedback for you. First off, Chuck, you did an amazing job of praising consistently the players. You did an outstanding job. You were constantly praising and complimenting the players, and that genuine feedback that you gave them was outstanding. You could turn to the next coach and say, hey, Chucky. So the first coach's name was Chuck, and then you get to Chucky. Hey, Chucky, you did an outstanding job of getting there early to practice and getting players extra reps of ground balls, extra swings in the batting cage. That was fantastic. Thank you for that extra time. Or you stayed after and worked with those players on some of those deficiencies. That was really awesome. Thank you so much for doing that, helping out the team in that way. Now, those are just two simple examples. It kind of gives you an idea of the praise, the specific praise that you could share with your coaching staff, and then go around and everybody praises. And so that gets that ego boosted up. It kind of checks the ego because there's some positivity going on, and then you get into some more of the constructive stuff. So I really do believe that a end of the season and end of the year coaches meeting where everybody wants to have coaches meetings at the beginning of the year. Everybody wants to plan and prep and get together. Let's have a coaches meeting. Let's get together. Let's talk about X, Y, and Z in the upcoming season. But what about deconstructing the season, reverse engineering the season a little bit? So moving forward, everybody can be better at what they're doing, serving our players, serving the baseball community in a better way. I think using an anonymous feedback is the best way to go when it comes to the players and the parents. But when it comes to the assistant coaches, the coaching staff, I think that's something that should be done as a roundtable format, a dinner, a breakfast, a lunch. So you see how there's variations here. Last week we talked about it with the survey, the feedback, the end of the season feedback survey, making it anonymous, but also having it different for 7, 8U and 9U or 10U, some of those younger levels, and versus versus the high school, where you would definitely want to parse it out into a parent's version and a player version, two different feedback forms coming back. With the younger players, they could work together. And so now this week, what I'm talking about with your coaching staff, it's even different than that, because I think you should meet in person, because it's adult to adult. It's coaching staff to coaching staff. It's not parents and coaches, players and coaches. It's coaches and coaches working together. So I think that format works the best. Again, if you have ideas that you would like to share, things that have worked well for you. In fact, a couple months ago, I got an email from a listener. You know who you are. You emailed me a PFP drill, pitchers fielding practice drill. So in the baseball community, for those of you that are a little newer to the baseball community, PFP is a acronym that's been around forever in the baseball community, in the coaching community, in the practice community. And PFP stands for pitchers fielding practice. So, hey, we're going to do some PFPs. That means simply that, and most of you already know this, I'm almost certain, but that means when you say, hey, we're going to do a PFP drill, this is a PFP drill, it throws it in, it categorizes it as something where you know that the pitchers are going to work on their defensive skills in this particular drill. Well, the coach reaches out a couple months ago, emails me, and had a version of the PFP that was efficient, that was authentic, and that was fun, and had, just like I said, efficient, had a lot of action, and shared it with me. And I said, that's a great version. That's a great version of that. Now, inherently in baseball, there are a finite amount of ways you can do anything. I truly believe. Now, in the baseball community nowadays, you hear the opposite. You hear everybody say there's a million ways to do this. There's an infinite amount of ways to do X, Y, or Z, or everybody has their own way of doing it. And I think the laws of physics and also the parameters of baseball, the rule book is one parameter, the field dimensions are another, and then the laws of physics, those three restrictions, I believe, make it so there are a finite amount of ways to do certain drills that would keep it authentic, efficient, safe, because you have the bases are at a certain distance, at certain angles, the field is a certain angle, there are rules, the ball is the same size, you can't change the ball, gloves have rules to them, bats have rules to them. It's not like you're designing a Pixar movie and it's just a blank canvas. Baseball coaching is not a blank canvas, and that's one of the biggest misconceptions in the baseball coaching community. It's like a blank canvas when you're working. It's like, no, it's not. It really isn't when you break it down. And even human characteristics, for the most part, fall into a category of one sort or another. You wouldn't say, I guarantee you would never have a team of 12 players, and all 12, you would need to coach them 12 different ways on every single topic, every single skill. If that were the case, I always say this, if that were the case, when I hear coaches say that, and I'm going to cut this tangent off on this last thought here. If that were the case, and when I hear coaches say, well, you got to coach every player differently for everything, or they say you got to coach him differently, and then I ask them, well, for what? Well, for X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, is there a defined endpoint to that? Is every player is supposed to be taught and coached and instructed differently and led differently in every single facet of the game and life? And I say, well, if that's the case, why do you have team meetings? Why do you have team speeches? Why do you have the team at any point ever get together and you talk to the team? If every player is learning differently, why would you ever get the team together and talk to them as a whole? You see the contradiction there? Why would you ever have a team meeting if every player learns differently? Why would you ever talk about the hitting skill to all your hitters at one time, or even a group of hitters? Why would you not stop that? And so thus you would have to then, or you would inherently be wasting all that time as a group message, because if they all learn differently, you would never waste time talking to them as a whole. You would keep them individual and coach them one by one, if that's what you truly believe. And I think this is something that goes deeper that we could break down, definitely, but this is a kind of a misconception in our society too, and just in the teaching education world and the coaching world. And if it doesn't add up, it doesn't add up. And so this coach, back to the coach that emailed me this PFP drill, and it was an outstanding version of how to make a high quality drill. So back to my message on that was, if you do have anything that you'd like to share, anything that works for you, any strategies that work for you that you'd like to share, email me those. I'd love to hear them, and I'd love to, share and converse about those so we can all be better coaches. So to wrap up part one of this episode, get together with your coaching staff at the end of the season, share out some things. I would go as a roundtable version. I would share out compliments and praise, specific praise for each of the assistant coaches. I would thank them for their time. And then from there, that leads you into that kind of constructive feedback portion of it, where you can get some good feedback and you can really improve. The praise and the thanking of them is definitely the bridge, but you want to get to the other side where the improvement starts. But that bridge is the praise, and that bridge is the thanking them. So you've established the connection, exactly like we do with our players. players. If you want your players to change their skill or listen to you as a coach, you have to build that connection and praise, and you have to praise them. You have to give them genuine praise. They need to know that it's not all negative. They need to know that everything out of your mouth is not going to be constructive all the time. They want to feel praised. It builds a connection. You're making deposits, and when you go to make that big withdrawal, you don't bounce that check. You don't have insufficient funds. And that banking metaphor is so true in the baseball, in the parenting, in the coaching, in the teaching world. And so we have to think of it as also that praise, even the best of genuine praise, is not the same value as these withdrawals we make, especially if you put a player on blast. If you make a withdrawal that's massive by putting them on blast in front of all their players, you better have made a bunch of deposits. And you can say to yourself, well, they need to learn how to do this and they need to learn how to take that. And yeah, in an ideal world, that would be great for coaches to just be able to not have to worry about making deposits and then then cashing in some withdrawals. It just doesn't work that way. You're working with 11-year-olds, 9-year-olds. It's hard enough with adults. So trust me on that. And I think the same holds true when you're meeting with your assistant coaches as a coaching staff at the end to really break down and put together also a plan to move forward. I don't think it should just be a praise and a compliment and then a gripe or a constructive feedback session. There should be action steps, specific, clear action steps that come out of it. I try with this podcast to stay with the year. So next, as we get to the summer, I want to do some more interviews, and I don't want this to be a predominantly an interview format for specific reasons, which I've shared many a times. But I do think that during the summer, that would be a good time for some interviews. And then as we get to the fall, we start to talk and we follow along that timeline of the fall season, the winter time of baseball, the early preseason, the preseason, and then we get into the spring season. So I like to tie those messages that have to do with that time of the year, that baseball calendar, into the podcast. So it's into the season for most organizations, most teams, most leagues. End of the year is now, or it's come about us already, or it's come upon us already, or it's about here, or it'll be here relatively soon. So that's why we are discussing these end of year feedback ideas, such as the team, the player and parent feedback, anonymous feedback surveys, and these coaches meetings that I highly recommend you all do. Okay, now speaking of listeners, got a good question last week from a listener. You know who you are. It was, and I like to keep these things anonymous for the most part. You guys know who you are. You're reaching out to me, and this email came in about the team going in the dumps when they get down a lot. And we've all been, if you coach a full season, you experience this. And if you coach long enough, you'll experience it many a times where your team gets down a lot of runs early. They get down maybe 5 or 6 runs, and then they just quit. And they don't have a lot of fight left in them, or they don't show that fight. And here's something that we always have to keep in mind as coaches. We don't control, we are the coach, and we do have influence for sure on our team and the environment more than anything. But at the end of the day, we don't have the ultimate control over our players. We can lead them to the water. We can lead them to whatever it is, but they need to finish the job. They need to execute it. Like I started kind of just a second ago to say, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. We need to give them we need to take them to the trough as best we can. We need to keep them around the trough and make it easy. We need to break down as many environmental barriers as we can so they're willing to take a drink as often as they need to and more often than not. In other words, we need to create an environment, one, where we don't discuss the score. I'm not saying we shouldn't keep score. I think score should be kept at all levels. You could talk me out of that maybe for the lower levels, but nonetheless, I don't think keeping score is a problem. What I think is a problem is our approach and how we focus on the score and how we as coaches and in the baseball community, especially the coaches and parents, make the score the centerpiece of importance. I love keeping score because I truly believe it makes players play up. It makes them more competitive with themselves. They want to play better. And it also gives us quality feedback because at the end of the day, the only statistic, and we've talked about this before, the only statistic in baseball that matters, the only one that matters is how many runs you scored, your team scored, how many runs your team produced, how many runs your players, your offense produced, and how many runs you prevented. How many runs did your team give up, or how many runs did the other team earn? So it's those two numbers. That's it. How many runs your team produced and how many runs your team prevented. That's it. Those are the only stats. That's why I say batting average is a stat I wouldn't even use because it doesn't directly correlate very well at all to run production. It counts a home run or a double the same as a single. That's inherently a big deal, a big flaw in that stat. It also doesn't value walks at all. A walk doesn't even get factored in. And you're telling me teams that don't have better patience and take the walk aren't better? You're crazy. Of course they do. So teams that drive doubles into the gaps, drive doubles and hardline drives into the gaps and take walks are going to be better. And batting average doesn't even count that. Well, it doesn't count walks, and it counts a double or a triple or a home run that's a line drive just over the fence or off the wall. It values that exactly the same as a blooper that the player swung at a bad pitch with no strikes and swung at a bad pitch, chased the pitcher's pitch out in front, chased a breaking ball that was barely off the dirt and got lucky and blooped one in with less than 2 strikes. Now with 2 strikes, hey, I'm all for that count. That's great. But with less than 2 strikes in plan A, oh, by the way, I'm going to talk about plan A next week. I got a great part on plan A, a great discussion for plan A hitting approach next week. You're going to want to hear that. And that conversation, that discussion is going to stem from the recently released video virtual conference from the ABCA, it's the biggest coaching association, the American Baseball Coaching Association, just released. I'm a member of that. I've been a member a long time, and they just released the virtual videos, the videos of the speakers, and from Brian Peters, they call him PD, Coach PD, Brian Peters out in Long Beach State. It's a very good offensive-minded coach. He's at Long Beach State, which has the most, I believe, the most current major leaguers of any colleges represented. And Coach Peters talks about something that has to do with Plan A that I want to share with you next week. So big shout out to Coach Peters on that. And we're going to discuss something that he uses, some terminology that he uses to discuss it and share with his players. And I want to share that little tidbit with you next week. But it is, I think, a great way to describe it and use that verbiage, that wordage with your players. And I'll share that again next week in episode 83. Okay, so back to my message about the team quitting. And these tangents, sometimes I like to dive a little deeper in. I think most of you all appreciate that. So when I dive off on these tangents, I like to get into some depth sometimes that goes a little off the script. All these episodes I script them out pretty detailed, but sometimes you just got to go off the cuff. And that's what I think sometimes gets some of the best discussion going. So I do try my hardest when I'm doing it on the mic here, or when I'm editing it, post-editing it with my editor Sam, and then I also edit it after Sam edits it. I edit more myself. Sam does a great job with the quality of the sound, how it sounds and the quality of it, and he cuts out the ums and things like that to give you better audio. I go back and I cut out things that I say so it's very streamlined and efficient, so you hear what you need to hear, because I value time probably more than anybody, or as much as anybody you'll ever meet. I value time, our time, all of our time. So with that said, sometimes these things we need to dive in a little deeper. But back to the point, back to the main part of this section of the podcast episode. Your team starts to quit. Put limited emphasis on the score. Your team starts to quit because of the score. Make the score less of a priority. I'm not saying you don't coach to the score. I highly recommend you don't bring up the score at all to your team. I recommend you don't bring up the score during the game at all to your team. Don't play the score, because now you're focused on results. I hear so many coaches, hey, process, focus, process oriented, process focused, not the results. And then I hear them at the game, all they talk about is the score. Hey, we're chasing two. Hey, I know we're up a little. Hey, we're up 3. Hey, we're up 3. Let's keep it going. Well, which one is it? Are you going after the process or the results? Because the score is simply results. There's no arguing that, right? I highly recommend do not talk about the score during the game with the players. Now, I do think it's important to pay attention to the score. I do think you should talk about the score a little bit with the coaching staff, with your assistants, strategizing based off of the score. I do think this is overutilized and over thought out, but I do think it is important from time to time to discuss and I definitely think it's important to pay attention to the score as the coach, as the manager, as somebody who can make some moves and strategize a little bit and adjust a little bit depending on the score. I do think the adjustments depending on the score are actually, you look at it in football, like the prevent defense. Well, they probably would have just been better off staying in their normal defense, blitzing a little bit, bringing some pressure on the quarterback, but instead they go prevent, and then the only thing it does, like, a lot of you already know where I'm going with this, it prevents the team that does it from winning, right? Same in baseball. Are you going to let off the pedal? Are you going to stop taking that extra base just because you're up 6 runs? Well, who knows? That team may drop a 7 spot on you in the next inning. Baseball is like that. So I do think that playing the score and paying attention to the score is important from the coaching perspective. I just wouldn't share that thought process. I wouldn't share that viewpoint with the team. I wouldn't create an environment where the score is talked about with the players. Save it for your assistants off to the side. You may walk up and say, hey, if we're down going into the last inning, do we want to go with this pitcher or that pitcher? Or if we're up, do we go with this pitcher? Or something like that, or if if we get this runner on base chasing one, do we use our pinch runner at this time or something of that sort? So you can strategize, but I highly recommend that you keep that as a strategy with the other coaches. Your players should play the game hard. They should always be hustling no matter what. And that leads me into the next bit of leverage. This is a leverage aspect of it. A leverage aspect is if a player quitting, what does that look like? So I need a little more specificity. Some on the team quit. Well, that usually means they stop hustling. They stop trying. Well, they're out of the game. You need to have enough players on your team where you can have leverage with playing time. One, if you think you're a good coach and if you're listening to this podcast, I truly believe you care. And if this 80-20 baseball masterclass, we are coming from the number one place of kind of the first place we're coming from is how to be better coaches for our players. And obviously we want to win more and we're going to win more. But the first thing we need to do is serve our players better, to be better coaches, to be better mentors, to guide them, whether it's through praise, compliments, discipline, hard work, effort, energy, working the process, delayed gratification, etc. We are coming from a place here. If you've listened to us long enough, you know that we're coming from a place of being good people, being good coaches, being good and having a solid foundation and quality, not all about the wins and losses, but about being better coaches, better the people that we are leading, our players as human beings. So the number one reason that we want to have more players on our team is so we can influence and help more people, more young kids be better. If we truly believe we are going to be the coach that serves best our players, then why wouldn't we want our players on the team? I was teaching summer school PE years ago, and I was working inner city Los Angeles. A lot of the kids were from South Central. Actually, in fact, most of them were born, raised in the South Central Los Angeles area. A lot of students from Compton. And summer school put a limit. The school I was at put a limit on how many students you could have. And I believe the limit was like 75. It was a pretty high amount, but it was summer school. So I don't know if I don't think during the regular school year I think it was like capped at 50. PE classes typically have, most of you know, more students that you can put more in there legally because of just how this class is set up. In fact, it's better to have more students because you can get more activities, more sports going, more games going. But nonetheless, I had 70 students to start the summer. I just kept adding students. I kept having the counselors put students in there and they kept coming to me saying, "Are you sure?" Because I kept signing off on more students. And I said to them, "We got to 100 students. I got to 100 students." And you're talking some very difficult high school, the area I was in. These kids were great kids, but they had a lot of struggles. They had a lot of things that they were let down a lot in life. And I've shared this many times on this podcast. The students I was working with for many years and why I think I've had such an advantage over most baseball coaches out there is because they didn't work inner city like I did. Over 2,000 days in the inner city. And that's not even with the coaching. I coached inner cities for years, but I'm talking about actually teaching inner city. I don't know anybody in my inner circle of coaches that taught over 2,000 days, over 2,000 full days with these inner city kids that I dealt with. Most of them from Compton, North Long Beach, Paramount, Linwood. Anybody who's familiar with those areas, those are tough neighborhoods, and those are neighborhoods that are really just a lot of chaos, unfortunately. And that's what drove me to be a great teacher and a great coach for them, is because I saw what they came from and I knew they needed that love, they needed that structure, they needed that support. And that's what really drove me every day. Besides my car to school, that's what drove me to being a better teacher and being there for them every day. So I didn't mind having 106 students like I did that summer in there, because I felt like if they weren't in my class, I couldn't help them. If I didn't have them on my team, I couldn't help them. Now, obviously, there's the limitations. Certainly, you have to draw the line somewhere, but I knew that if they were in my class, I could influence them the way I wanted. And if they weren't around, I had no influence over them. And I felt like even a little positive influence spread out amongst the 106 students was better than zero influence, was better than them not being there. So having a team with more than 12 players or more than 10 players, say 11, I think 12 or 13 or 14 players is perfect. If you are fair with your playing time, especially those lower levels, and you're organized with your practices and efficient, and you can group them up and do subgroups and drills into different areas and have multiple drills going at one time, which is definitely doable. If you listen to this podcast, we've talked about that. Then you can have more players, but it gives you leverage with playing time. So when your players start to quit, when they're down 5 or 6 runs, you have other players to go to. You want to have players as leverage, other players to stick in there that are willing to work hard. This may not always work because you may have used your subs and things like that, and it might be towards the end of the game where all your other players are in, but why not just play with 8? If you need to play with 8, play with 8. 2 outfielders, and just say, you know what, your actions, your lack of hustle to that player, that lack of commitment and follow through from that player costs your team an extra outfielder, and play with 2 outfielders. Send a message. All right? Send a message that if we're not going to hustle, then we're not going to play with all our players and you're hurting the team. Or you're coming out, ideally you're coming out and I'm putting somebody else in there that will not quit, that will keep playing. So the 2 biggest things, use playing time as leverage, and the second biggest thing, or the biggest thing, is to set the environment where the score is not the main thing. You could have little mini challenges like winning the inning or winning a subset of innings. Say we're going to win every 3 innings. So we're going to win the first 3 innings, the second 3 innings. If you play 7, like a lot of youth, then we're going to win the 7th inning. Maybe those are certain challenges. Have competitions with run production, offensive stats like OPS, defensive web gems. Have competitions with that where there's rewards, or Gatorades, or praise is getting put out. Praise the hustle. Don't allow the laziness. Don't allow the players to quit. How do you not allow it? Well, you don't have ultimate control, but you do have leverage, and you have to utilize that leverage. And leverage is playtime. Playing time during the games is the number one leverage. During practice, you can leverage the bear crawl, which you could always use some of that in-game laziness and use that leverage of bear crawl later after the game or at the next practice as a punishment or as a consequence, I should say. But playing time is your number one leverage when it comes to game time, and players need to earn it. And if they quit on their team, if they don't have fight, they need to come out. And if you need to play with 8, play with 8. I recommend having 14 players, 13 or 14 players, so that allows you to have some players ready to go when other players start to quit when they're down, or should I say when the team is down in terms of runs. And the other thing, do not make the game about the runs. I know the scoreboard's there, but set a good example. The scoreboard's right in their face. Don't talk about it. Talk about it with the other coaches when it comes to strategy, but don't talk about it. Chasing 3, chasing 2, chasing 3. I know a lot of coaches don't think this is a big deal. It's almost ubiquitous across the baseball community. Hey, we're down 3, or hey, we're up 2. Let's keep the pedal down. I think coaches would be shocked how much they talk about the score. And then they turn around and then the same coaches will talk just as much about being process oriented. Well, which one is it? Are you about the score or are you about the process? Now, as coaches, we use the score to drive our process, but we shouldn't use the score to drive our players. While it may drive and should drive some of our strategies as coaches, the hustle, the hard work, those are the things that should drive our players. The desire to get better, that should drive our players. That's the environment we should create for our players. So those things take some time. One takes a little more time definitely than the other. One, the leverage that we have, the playing time leverage, that is something that we can implement right away and send the message right away that if you're going to quit on your team, that if you're going to quit because our team is down, or for whatever reason, doesn't really matter if the score is involved or not, if they're going to quit or they're not going to go hard, they will be taken out of the game immediately. And that is why it is so important to establish that expectation, that standard, those rules from the get-go, from before the first practice, and then enforce it consistently across the board with all the players. That is why that is so important. And then 2, create a game culture, a team culture where the score is not the main focus. It's not much of a focus at all. And lastly, I'd like to share a little strategy that I think works. Everybody likes stories. All of us like stories. We do. We like stories. Share a story. Maybe condense a concise version or a summary of a story of somebody that could have quit in their life or in that particular part of their life. Share a story with them of somebody that did have the opportunity or that could have very easily quit but didn't, that persevered, that fought through it. The first thing that comes to mind, the first story that comes to mind is the story Unbroken of Louise Zamperini. The book Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand is quite famous, quite well known. Many of you are familiar with that story. But if you summarized that story with younger kids, that might not resonate. Maybe with high school kids, definitely. But examples like that are super impactful. Examples and stories like that. How about taking a player, a story of a player, do a Google search on a player in the major leagues or just on the story of perseverance, did not quit, overcame obstacles, MLB player, major league player, became an MLB star despite obstacles. If you search those words, those keywords right there, you will find stories that you can then turn around and give the synopsis, a kind of a nice 2 or 3 minute version with some energy to your players during a practice or after a game that was tough, or not necessarily after a game because that's the least valuable time to extend the talk and post-game speeches. I've talked about that before. But at the next practice after a tough game, those perseverance, those maybe after a losing streak, those stories of perseverance that MLB players went through, even teams went through, like talk about the Washington Nationals. If you can do a quick story about the Washington Nationals and how their record wasn't very good at all to start the season a few years back when they ended up winning the World Series. Or share the story about the Yankees and the Red Sox when the Yankees were up 3-0. Show that video. There's videos out there that kind of condense it, how they came back from basically being down to their last game, their last inning, and came back and won the series when no team had ever come back from down 3-0. Those little stories like that, sprinkled in at the end of practices, at the beginning of a practice, at opportune times, can be very beneficial. I think little stories of perseverance are always good. The better, the more engaging that way, the presentation of that story, the better. Don't get long-winded with that. Maybe show a short video, share a video, email it to the players. If they're old enough, email it to them, text it to their parents. Say, hey, give this to your kids to watch. That can be an effective strategy. But first and foremost, playing time is leverage. And then the culture of we're not a score-focused team. We're a process, production, individual production, at-bat to at-bat, pitch-to-pitch type of team. This week's episode, we're going to wrap up there, and we're going to get to the paradigm shifter that I want to share with you. It's a quick hitter paradigm shifter. We're going to get to that next week in next week's episode. I also have a couple book recommendations, and then I'm going to share with you what I got on that plan A part from a very respected, very good coach at Long Beach State, Brian Peters, and what he said and his wordage in the plan A situation with our players and how to coach it up. So I'll get to that next week. I got a couple really good recommendations when it comes to books that I think all of you should take the time to at least audiobook or read a chapter a night before you go to bed. Take some notes on those. I'll recommend those next week, and we'll talk about the paradigm changer that'll help you as a coach not get too up or down when the score gets up or down in your favor or not in your favor. So we'll get to that next week. Until then, support the podcast. That would be greatly appreciated. Easy to do, and the link easy to do. Just click the link, support the podcast. I don't do commercials on here. I don't plan on doing commercials on here, but part of that's going to be based off of the support of the podcast. And we are at episode 82, going on episode 83, trying to bring something good every week to you guys. The commercials is something I don't want to go to just to keep that podcast rolling because, for example, a lot of these I record on Saturday morning. Sometimes I record these Friday evening. It does take up time away from my family, which I value super high, but I also am so big on making the baseball community a better place. And when I see the listener rate, I see the statistics on the listeners, I see you, I get the feedback, I get emails from you, and I see that you guys are benefiting. I see you guys when you email me, you know, you all have emailed me with your success stories. That motivates me because I want the baseball community to be better because yeah, I'm here for my family. I'm here for my own kid. But at the end of the day, I also want to have a positive influence on the baseball community, all the kids out there supporting you as coaches to be better for your players, to have more fun, to build up their skills better, to have a better environment, to make them better players through the vehicle of baseball, better people through the vehicle of baseball, and along the way, win more games. So with that said, your support, very beneficial, very helpful. Thank you, those coaches that are already supporting the podcast. You know who you are. I know who you are. Thank you so very much. And until next episode, take care of yourselves, your health, take care of your families. I know you are. Keep taking care of those families and take all this out. Take the two things that we really broke down today, take them out there, put them into your team, put them into your program, put them into your coaching repertoire, put them into your paradigm, and make the baseball community, the coaching community a better place, make your team better, make everything around you out there on the baseball field better using these two strategies we talked about today. We'll get into more strategies next week in episode 83, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.